What if I told you that a story could teach your child more history, science, math, and literature than a year of textbooks? Welcome to the Story Schooling Podcast. I'm Angel Selden, author of Curiouser.
And I'm Sandy Fouts, co-founder of Wonderwell Learning.
What if the secret to better learning isn't doing more, but doing less?
I love that question.
I love this, the transformative power of depth over breadth in education and life. Why slowing down and going deep creates richer learning experiences than trying to cover everything. Last episode, we talked about the power of stories. So I'm going to start out with a story that helps to answer this question. If you're familiar, Jon Krakauer is an author who wrote about his experience in the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. At one point in his story, he describes two different approaches of two different men climbing the notorious Khumbu icefall on the way to the summit of Everest. This was the first man's approach. Stuart, the youngest and seemingly strongest client on the whole team, had dashed out of camp at the front of the group, soon exhausted himself, and by the top of the icefall was in visible agony at the back of the line. This was the second man's approach. Demonstrating the savvy he'd acquired over 3 Everest expeditions, he'd started out slowly, but kept moving at the same steady pace. By the top of the icefall, he'd quietly passed almost everyone, and he never even seemed to be breathing hard. Okay, I'll tell you another quick story. In 1936, the University of Washington crew team went to the Berlin Olympic. They never would have made it if they hadn't discovered a change in strategy that became their key to winning every race they competed in. The conventional strategy, used by virtually all crew teams, was to start out each race at a high stroke rate, 38 to 40 strokes per minute, to get ahead. They would fall back to a slightly slower stroke rate in the low 30s for the majority of the race. For the last stretch, they would bring their stroke rate back up again to 38 to 40 strokes per minute. The UW crew team experimented with a new strategy. What would happen if they started the race at a relatively low stroke rate, 29 strokes per minute instead of 39 strokes per minute? As expected, they fell way behind at first. But then something fascinating and unexpected happened. All their competitors exhausted themselves in the beginning and slowed down one by one. UW slowly but steadily started passing each one, ultimately winning every race with an entire boat length between their boat and the second place boat. What's even more incredible is that, like the Mount Everest climber, they weren't breathing much harder than normal at the end of the race. What's so fascinating to me is that we have had the story of the tortoise and the hare probably since before Aesop. Aesop was the first person to write them down. When was it? BC, 1500 BC? I don't know. We've had this story of the tortoise and the hare for thousands of years, and hardly
I did
anyone...
not know it went back that far. I had no idea it was that old.
Well, let me Google it and fact check that. When did Aesop live? Okay, not quite that far back, but Aesop is believed to have lived around 620 to 564 BC in ancient Greece. He was a storyteller credited with a collection of fables that were originally passed down orally. So he was the first person to write it down in about 500, 600 BC. But we've had this story for thousands of years. And I think we violate this principle more egregiously than ever now. We, especially here in the United States, if you're listening in the United States, and maybe even other industrialized countries are headed in this direction too, but we want to go faster, do more. Presidents have said, we no longer live in an agrarian culture. Why do we still follow the agrarian calendar when it comes to school? Why not have year-round school? And a lot of states do have year-round school now. They do have more breaks, but there isn't like a sabbatical from school anymore for a lot of kids. There are efforts to lengthen the school day. We have already lowered the age at which we start various academics. You know, kindergarten used to be just playtime. It is not playtime anymore. They start academics in kindergarten. They start academics in preschool. And we want more rigor. We are attempting, that in school we're attempting to do more and more. And I think it's backfiring. It's having the opposite effect. We need to slow down.
So why, Angel, what do you think? Why do we slow down? So what's the purpose of slowing down? Because you would think, if you speed up, you get more done. Obviously, in the principle of the tortoise and the hare, that's not true. And we can see how that's not true. But taking it back to what is that principle of what's important? Why is it important to slow down? When we slow down, we have the opportunity to build relationships. And we've talked previously about the different kinds of relationships that we want to build. And that's maybe a relationship with God, a relationship with nature, and then relationships with fellow man. When you are running through the world, you can't develop a relationship with God when you don't even take time to slow down to think about God. And the same thing is, with nature. I remember early on, my kids were pretty little, and I decided that I wanted to take them on a hike. And nature has become a big piece of my heart that I've developed through my kids, through growing up with my kids. And this was at the very start of that. And I knew that I just knew I wanted to get my kids out, and I had found this hike that I want to take my kids on. So I had 3 kids with me, and we get on the trail, and I just remember saying, "Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go." And they kept wandering up the side of the hill, and I kept bringing them back to the trail, and let's go, let's go, let's go. And it was a pretty miserable hike. And when I took a step back and reflected on that later, I asked myself the question, what was your destination? Like, this wasn't even a loop trail. This was a out and back trail. And so stopping and thinking, what was my destination? I had no destination. My end goal was actually just to enjoy being outside with my kids and to play. So we went back again. I think it was the next week, to that exact same trail in that exact same location, with a different mindset it was knowing what the goal in mind was, just to enjoy and play in nature. And we probably got, in the couple of hours that we were there, 50 feet down the trail because they went up the side of the hill and they played and they played. And this time, nobody was miserable because we slowed down and enjoyed where we were, instead of trying to race to some invisible finish line that didn't even exist. And so in so doing, when we were trying to race to the end, there was no stop and smell the flowers. We weren't developing a relationship with nature. And so that was probably one of the first times I remember specifically realizing the importance of slowing down and not speeding through.
It's not that you didn't have any goal at all. Your goal was to develop a relationship with nature. So if you're familiar with Georgia O'Keeffe, she's a painter who's best known for her close-up paintings of flowers. So Georgia O'Keeffe said, "Still, in a way, nobody sees a flower really. It is so small. We haven't the time. And to see takes time, like to have a friend takes time." And it really is like making a friend. What if you treated academics like speed dating, and you just, all right, let me just get to know some facts about this person, and then I move on to the next person, and I just get to know some facts about them, except that never ends. I have a friend locally in Minnesota who said that her daughter spent one day in 8th grade learning about the Holocaust. And I know you mentioned in the last episode that your daughter, your oldest daughter, who's in law school now, became obsessed with World War II and wanted to read all the books about World War II, and from different perspectives and different stories of World War II, from the Christian perspective to the Jewish perspective, from a German perspective, or from a Danish perspective, So Helen Keller made a similar observation. She said, "It is possible to know a flower, root, stem, and all the processes of growth, and yet to have no appreciation of the flower fresh bathed in heaven's dew." So I would argue that the love and appreciation of the flower, not the knowledge of its parts, is what fuels curiosity, passion, and an abundant life.
It's so easy sometimes, like when you know that your kid is passionate about something, you think, oh, okay, they're super excited about that. So there's a couple of things that can happen. One, sometimes we're tempted to use it against them. Like you can read that World War II book after you finish your math lesson and your language arts lesson. And so you're almost using this curiosity unintentionally as a device to try to get them to do the things that they may not want to do. I was recently reading a comment that somebody had on a Facebook group where she said, "Give me some advice. What should I do? I haven't finished the math and language arts book. And my son said all he wants to do this summer is study science and history." And I said, my comment back was, That's amazing. Like, listen to your kid. What's the goal here? If the goal is to love things deeply and to love to learn, he's right there and he's asking you and he's telling you exactly what he wants and how to do that for him. So you just now, it's your job to trust him and listen to him and inspire him and get excited with him and just do that with him and fuel it. Just continue to feed and fuel that and not kill it by saying, well, let's do my agenda first. Like, he had his curiosity, and what a gift for your kid for you not to have to kind of be a detective and listen in. He really told you exactly what that was that he needed. And what I cautioned against, I said, if you continue that math book and that language arts book, what you're going to create is resentment and drudgery. And then the next year, you may want him to pick up the next level, he's already going to hate it. Whereas if you can give him exactly what he needs now, and he may be excited about pulling out the next levels, language arts and math, and love to do that later on, provided that excitement and that curiosity is there and he's ready for it. So I think that's something we want to be really careful about is it making sure that that's what comes first. And then if there's time, then, maybe you can have your kids or suggest your kids to do something else. But really the other piece of that is because everything is so interconnected, the learning about your math and your language arts and all of that is going to come into it. And so we think that we have to separate it all, but really that's all going to be interconnected. Once that fire is lit, everything else is going to come in at some point in a natural way.
Absolutely. Like you said, everything's interconnected, everything's transdisciplinary. And it's such a huge paradigm shift for most of us because we've grown up ever since we were 5 years old to think in terms of subject matter. I mean, for how many hours a day are you in school? 6 hours a day. And it's all compartmentalized. Everything you're learning is compartmentalized by subject. And you would never see like science alone in the real world. I mean, unless you are a physicist, you're not going to be just dealing with s orbitals and p orbitals and studying that. And so there is a time and place for that. And actually, that reminds me, what we're talking about here, going deep versus covering a lot superficially, is we're not talking about hyperspecialization. We're not suggesting the Tiger Woods approach where, his dad started training him in golf from age 2, and that was the only skill that he got really good at and developed throughout his life. What we're suggesting is just taking time, slowing down and not feeling like you have to do every single subject every day, and that you can just immerse yourself in one person's life in history, one scientist, one scientific discovery, one period of time like World War II, like we were talking about, and then you can move on to the next thing. Sandy, you mentioned, going back to that interconnectedness of everything. That, I think the easiest way to do that is what we talked about in the last episode, start with stories. And it really it reverses the paradigms. So the conventional approach to education is to start with individual pieces of information. We treat them like building blocks. So we're going to give these kids these building blocks that someday they're going to put it all together and build something with it, build a house or whatever. But we're not given any context for it. So we don't know what to do with these building blocks. We don't know how they fit together. I call that the part to whole paradigm of learning. And when you start with stories, you switch that around. You start with the whole and you learn the parts through the whole. So start with the whole house. Or maybe that's not the best analogy. Let's say I like the tapestry analogy. So the whole to part approach, which is the paradigm that we are operating within in our homeschools right now, Sandy, you and I, and many other people out there, I know, we treat everything that there is to learn in the world like a tapestry. Like, just imagine this giant tapestry that goes forever in all directions. We're exploring this tapestry, which has the stories of the world and all the elements of the world in this tapestry. And when your daughter focused on World War II, studying World War II, that's one section of the tapestry. And she's looking at these stories. And if you imagine that the subjects are the threads that are woven into the tapestry, the different colored threads. So within the World War II section of this tapestry, you have blue threads and yellow threads, like the blue threads of science and the yellow threads of geography and the green threads of politics and the red threads of psychology and whatever other subject matter I haven't mentioned yet. But then in the part to whole paradigm, it's like we've unraveled the whole tapestry, and we organize all the threads in this tapestry. We put all of the blue threads together and all of the yellow threads together and all the red threads together. And we're like, we're just going to study these individual threads. And we've completely unraveled them from their context.
And you would have no idea how to put something like that back together. Whereas when you're seeing it in the whole first, then you can pick out the little pieces and you can see how everything fits together. That's a beautiful analogy. I was in the kitchen with Millie the other day. Well, I was making a loaf of sourdough bread, which I'm new at, and I asked her, "Hey, Millie, do you want to form the loaf?" And she got all excited. Yeah. So she comes in and she starts forming the loaf. And then she asked the question, "Well, where does sourdough come from? Like, where does that starter come from?" I don't know. She gets all excited and she runs to the computer and she types in an AI search, "Where does sourdough come from?" And then it started talking about the history of like the different time periods when sourdough was popular. And even in like during the gold rush, it talked about the gold rush, how it became really popular then. And then it talked about COVID and how it became more popular during COVID and how there was a surge then. So there's these different time periods. And then she asked me, well, what's the gold rush? And then she's like, is this talking about the pandemic that I know about? Because she thinks of, history, and she gets really excited about that. And then it starts to talk about the science behind it and how you can actually capture it in the air and create your own sourdough starter. You don't have to actually buy one or get one from somebody else.
Science.
And then it starts to talk about the science of sourdough and I just, you talk so much about everything.
Chemistry and biology in that.
Then we're cooking and we can use our fractions. I'm just kidding. But just that one question. And I could have said, well, just make the sourdough loaf. And then we need to make sure we get this done. And then we can look that up. Whereas that fire was lit to go deep in something right there. And then her and I just made this list of questions of all these different things that we can answer that spread from the single question of where does sourdough come from? It's so...
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And when they ask a question, you have to answer it right away.
Yes.
I have another good example of that. Oh my gosh. I wish I could remember the exact question. But my third child, son, was really obsessed with becoming a policeman someday. And so he would watch these YouTube videos of police officers doing, exciting police officer videos.
Is this your oldest son?
My oldest son, yes. So
okay.
He was like 10 or 11 at the time. And he asked a question about meth, maybe. He said, so I had meth on me or something like that. And it was at dinner time. And I was like, let's go with it. Like, he was super curious about meth and marijuana. Like, would I be addicted? Or I can't remember what it was. And we were like, no, it's ripe right now. It's like an avocado. Questions are like an avocado. It's
you
like
don't
not
use
ripe,
it.
not ripe, not ripe. It's ripe right now. We need to cut into this, baby. Use it now. You let it go any longer and it's not ripe anymore. Like, he's curious about it now. So let's follow that.
And then you could go deep in there for so long. And then there's a point where like something else takes over and there's something else to go deep in. Sorry.
Yes. And I promise everyone who's listening, I promise you that if you follow these interests, you just think like, okay, really, police work? Okay, in your free time, but you need to be doing, like, we dismiss things as being, well, that's not important and that's not academic, that's not educational. But then all these questions came up about drugs and addiction and how do they work and the law, why is it illegal? Like, it sparked so many great conversations that are really opportunities to develop critical thinking skills, not just acquire knowledge. And I think those critical thinking skills those really only happen when you spend a lot of time on a subject, really exploring a topic.
Yeah.
Versus just learning some facts about it.
Because then you're actually thinking about it, and they're thinking about it throughout their day too. Because when you go deep into something, then that concept or that thing is on their mind, and all of a sudden out of nowhere they ask you a question that's related to it when you're not even talking about it then. Whereas if you're just exposing them, there's value in exposing them to the buffet, but then when they choose something from that buffet, then allow them to go deep in on that. When you find that thing, that spark, and then you're going deep on that one thing, it occupies your thoughts and your curiosity. It allows you to be able to ask more questions, which then presents more questions and more questions to be able to, as opposed to just that when there's just, you haven't gone deep on anything, your mind isn't filled with the fuel that it needs to be able to think of those other questions.
Absolutely.
Do.
Another promise that I want to make to our listeners is if they fuel these interests, these desires, these questions, they will end up covering almost everything. I guess I can't say I know, but very, very certain that they will have far fewer knowledge gaps if you go deep on these things. They'll end up covering so many things that are meaningful and memorable for them and connect with everything else that they're learning, that they will have fewer knowledge gaps than if you tried to go through the standard school curriculum. And I want to share another analogy. I don't want to go too heavy on the analogies, too many different analogies. But this one is another gem from Claire Jones, our friend who grew up on a peach orchard, and her family farmed peaches as like a family project. And she said that every spring they would wait until the peaches started to grow. And when they got to about, I don't know, what was it, an inch?
Yeah.
Like an inch in diameter.
Mhm.
Do you remember her telling this story?
No, but I see where you're going.
You see where I'm going with this?
I see where you're going.
They got maybe an inch in diameter, and they have to pick about 2/3 of those peaches off the trees. And they're all perfectly good peaches. And she said it kind of feels wrong to, like, almost wasteful. Like, why are you ripping off all these peaches? And so she asked her dad, why do we need to take off so many of these peaches? And he said, because if you left all of them on, they would never ripen. They would never grow past a certain size, and none of them would ripen. And I think, to me, that very clearly communicates what happens when you try to cover everything. When you try to do everything, then nothing fully ripens, and you don't feast. You don't get to taste of that sweet fruit of diving deep into fewer areas.
Well, I think it's a misunderstood idea that that you can create an environment in which there are no gaps, because there is so much to know. There's no way that we could know everything ever. But learning deep on one thing, one person can go learn deep one topic and somebody else can go deep in a completely different topic, but some of the same lessons are pulled out. Some of what's really important that you need is pulled out by going deep in something else. And so there is danger. I remember saying as a really young mom, my kids will have no gaps because I'm going to do it this way. But that's the surface level. Remember the story of the national parks and how a friend of ours told the story of somebody she knew who went to
a very well-intentioned mother
plan and to go to all the national parks. I mean, what mom hasn't had that dream? I think I've had that dream before. But what ended up happening is that in so doing, they didn't get to know any of the parks. They would show up to a national park, they might step in it, claim they've visited that national park, maybe get their stamp, and then, get on out and get to the next one, where they didn't know any of the parks. They could claim that they've been to each of them, but they didn't actually know any of them. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we go deep. We go deep so that we can actually get to know something and connect with it, and then that knowledge sticks. And there's lots of different ways in which we get to know something or go deep or linger on something. One of those in my house has been, that I especially noticed with my younger one, is with books. It took me a while to realize the value of a reread. And I don't remember who taught me that, but to read the same book over and over and over again, I used to think that was a waste. Why? You've read it once, let's get to the next one. There's too many good books out there to waste reading one again. And then I heard the concept of the power of a reread. And so my youngest will listen to the same book over and over and over and over again. And tears will come out if I try to get her on a different book when she's still so involved in the one. I told the story previously about I've read The Secret Garden several times. It's one of my favorite childhood books. It's one that I really connected with. But it was this last time that I read it that I got the message out of that, of the power of positive thinking. And I'd never derived that message from it before. Another book that we've had as a reread again and again in our family is that we have a tradition to read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol every Christmas. And sometimes it's a little bit of a different version, but it has become, there's quotes and jokes that we'll say out of that book because we've read it so many times. We have these lines memorized that, we'll repeat throughout the year. And so to really get to know the story and sometimes even just to really get to know an author. I know my daughter gets super excited when she recognizes an author's name. So she wants to read, another book by that author. And so just the idea is encouraging to know that the message is it's okay to linger. It's okay to go deep. Don't worry about hurrying on to the next thing because you're afraid you're going to miss something, but you actually are going to miss something by not allowing yourself to go deep into one thing or reread the same thing.
Yes.
I know you
Amen.
revisit the same stories too, Angel. Do you have any particularly that come to mind?
I mean, I've had the same experience where I reread a book and it's almost like, wow, how could I have been so blind to this before? Two that come to mind are Charlotte's Web, which I reread a year ago. And somehow I never really cared for the book, but I read it to my youngest because it's a classic, and all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness, this label that's put above this pig, this ordinary pig, not just an ordinary pig, he was a runt, and put this, the...
Terrific.
Sorry. Yeah, the Charlotte, the spider puts in the spider web, terrific, and some pig, and Wilbur starts believing that about himself, and everyone who visits and sees the sign starts to think of him that way too. The other one is Anne of Green Gables. Also thought it just was so annoying to me. Anne was annoying to me the first time I heard that book when my oldest was 6 and we listened to it on audiobook. Again, I was just trying to go through all the classics and I was like, why is this a classic? Because it's old, because it's I don't get it. Is it just this funny story about this silly orphan girl? And probably 5 years ago, I read it again. And this time I was seeing it through a new lens. I mean, you're always seeing books through a new lens. But I had read a book on principles of great writing that taught me that in every great story, the characters represent a concept higher than themselves. And so I intentionally read Anne of Green Gables again, thinking, what concept could these characters represent that's higher than themselves? And just asking that question, just being aware of that principle of great storytelling, I could see it. And I saw 2 different possibilities. Of course, there are more. I'm not saying this is what the author intended or this is what it represents, but I could see how it could very clearly represent Anne as the spirit of the law and Marilla as the letter of the law, and how they both needed each other. They needed that we need both. But Marilla could represent logic and Anne could represent intuition. And so when I read it, thinking of those 2 different possibilities, I felt like I understood the relationship between logic and intuition better, and between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law much better. And then I loved the book because it had real significance for me. I was learning something. And like you said, and there's many other books that you could learn the relationship between logic and intuition through. You learn some of these same lessons. So is that what you wanted to know? Is that your question? Examples or?
Yes. And because the very first time you read a book, you're really just getting the surface story. You're learning the people and you're kind of learning the setting and you're getting the idea of the story. And then once you already know that and you read it again, your brain has the ability to pull out more information because it's not focused on the generalization of the story. So that
Right, following
just
what's going on.
stories and books are one of those places where you can easily find an opportunity to slow down and go deep.
And
It's about
kids are so good
the
at that.
depth. Yes.
The depth.
Yeah.
Yes, because
I mean,
like you said, Millie rereading, she just wants to listen or read the same book over and over and over again. And you see little kids wanting to learn, even if in families where there isn't a culture of reading, kids will want to watch the same movie over and over and over again. And it means they know there's something more that they can get out of it. They're still picking up on the story, the meaning. They're still analyzing how the characters are relating to each other. They're learning how to function in this world socially and otherwise.
I want to talk a little bit more about another area in which I've shared this with you before, Angel, that you taught me about the beauty of revisiting the same place, the location over and over and over again. I had moved to Minnesota and I was determined to show my kids, to find every little cool thing that ever existed in Minnesota. And we went to some really cool places, but there was this one special place that we went as friends, Minnehaha Falls. And it was while we were there one time, you told me that you guys come back to the spot over and over again, and that you thought that revisiting that there was that it was really important and there was beauty and value in visiting the same place. And it really made me think, because here I was trying to visit a new place every single time. And so while we still did that, we started to see Minnehaha Falls became that place. And we would go in the winter and we would go in the fall and we go in spring. And I remember there was the season when the touch-me-nots would pop and we'd walk down the trail and we'd touch all the seeds and all these beans are popping. And then
It
in the
burst
winter,
open, yes.
when the waterfall was frozen. And so we're seeing it every time we went back, we're seeing it in a different light. But then there also became these little special places. Whereas the kids would want to go to this little sand cave where they had like carved things into the sandstone cave. And they had these like secret little nooks or under the certain bridge, and they would play the troll under the bridge. They got excited about going back to the same place because they knew it almost intimately and they knew all of the little parts and pieces of this special place, and they became a part of them. And, we have probably deeper, more connected memories to that space that we went to again and again, as opposed to, I couldn't tell you all the other places that we went to. Those don't hold a deep memory or connection because we didn't get to know it in the way we got to know Minnehaha Falls because we revisited so many times.
Yes, that reminds me. With the peach tree analogy, what I wanted to promise was that there's always another season. So you're picking off 2/3 of the peaches and you let those grow to full ripeness and you harvest those. But then there's going to be another spring where another set of peaches will grow. And that as you go deep, you will end up covering so many more things.
I see you know them better. We had peach trees as a kid and we didn't prune them. Usually we didn't prune them. And you get we did have ripe peaches, but they were little and they were puny and they weren't as good as when you got those Utah peaches, like the big, giant, full, fresh peaches. Definitely, it wasn't the same. What was created from pruning and focusing on the few, and getting rid of the ones that, sometimes you also look for which ones are weaker, like leave the very best one there to grow and develop and get rid of the ones that aren't as big or strong.
Right. Okay. So skills.
I always felt like my son there was something about music that he would need in his life. And what that fully is, I don't know. He has talked about how it brings him a lot of peace when there's turmoil going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kept introducing it and bringing it into his life in different mediums and different ways, just kind of trying to spread the love there for him. And then he took lessons for a while, and there was a point where he said, I don't want to take lessons anymore. And I allowed him to not do it because of the reasons that he gave me. Sometimes it's, you've got to go with your parent intuition on what's right at that time and whose goals you're trying to meet, theirs or yours. But he quit for a while, and then his dad a couple years ago said, it'd be really cool if you learned this song on the piano. And he had enough pre-knowledge, all of these little seeds had been planted, and he goes, that would be cool if I knew that song. And so we found the sheet music and printed it out for him, and he spent hours learning the song. And then he came to us and said, I would love a subscription to this music platform so that he could find any sheet music he wanted. And so then I asked him, like, do you want lessons? Here's mom, like, super excited. Do you want lessons? He's like, no, I like how I'm learning right now. And then, he would slowly ask for something else, a new tool or a new resource. And so we would feed that to him without shoving it. I've tried to be very careful because so many kids hate piano after it had been shoved so forcefully down them. Feeding it, but feeding it carefully and listening. And when that spark was there, giving it more. And music has become that thing for him. And then he, ventured into the guitar, and then he ventured into the ukulele. And I don't expect a concert pianist out of this, but he's getting to know music, and it is becoming this companion with him that helps him, like that's going to be there, this friend that'll be with him.
That's what I was going to
through
say.
Life. Yeah.
I like that. I would like to keep that analogy going throughout. Think of, are we making friends with this topic or this person in history or this skill like music?
And, in my household, it's nature. So that did become a big theme that I guess that's another thing to talk about, is how you lead by example. And so when you personally show interest in something and you go deep into it, and they're watching you, and so they go deep with you. But what you're teaching them, I wasn't necessarily teaching them about nature, but I was teaching them how they could go deep in something, and that was valuable. So now my daughter is so deep into the law, and that just obsessed her mind and her thoughts all the time. And nature has become a friend of hers because she got to know it through me, and she saw that example of what it was like to go deep into something. I think it's really funny when my kids are hanging out with their 20-year-old friends, and a bird hops by, or they hear a bird and they're like, and they think it's funny too. They're like, oh, did you hear that chickadee? Their friends are like, what? Why do you know that? Or they'll pop these bird names or things out because it was something we went deep on. And it doesn't mean, like I said, that they're not necessarily as obsessed with nature in the way that they were as kids, because I shared that with them and taught that to them. But they've connected with that, and then each have permission to go deep into something else, because that's not weird. Sometimes it's looked at as not normal to obsess over something. We find in homeschool a lot, like that obsessing over something, there's so much value actually in allowing your kids to truly obsess over something. It's fun.
Absolutely. It's so much fun. My oldest daughter read Jane Eyre 7 or 8 times, and she has a new copy because her old one is so tattered, but it is full of highlights and notes. Like, she'll write notes in the margin. She also has little sticky notes sticking out with tabs. And every time she would learn something different, and she would start making spiritual connections, increasing her spiritual understanding and her understanding of human nature. And then my son goes from, I told you he was obsessed with becoming a police officer. His other obsessions have included card throwing. And for hours a day, he would practice throwing cards, and he ended up being able to slice through a stalk of celery. So that could be even weirder than being a bird nerd. Then he was like done with it. And, again, you think, even now I'm like, okay, that's one thing I can't pull anything academic out of. But you know what I can pull out of that is he was learning how to be a passionate person, and he was learning how to persevere and do something that's very tedious and stick with it over and over and over again until he mastered it. You don't have to just do that with math problems in order to learn that skill. Then he was obsessed with lawn care and wanted to start his own lawn care business. And I could ask him any question about grass, and he knew the answer because he had done the research. So I said, and here's how science comes into play. I asked him, I didn't think he would actually know the answer to this, but we were going on a walk together. He was 13 or 14. And I said, I wonder why that person's lawn is like a really dark green and that other person's lawn is a lighter green. And he said, iron in the fertilizer. There's iron in it, and that makes it greener. And I said, oh my gosh, I just had an aha moment. Spinach is high in iron, and it's dark green. And it's the iron that makes it dark green. And I wasn't making that connection. And my son thought that was fascinating because he already was passionate about the lawn and the chemistry of it. And he's like, really? And then guess what? Now he is totally obsessed with health and nutrition. and he researches nutrition in depth. This sounds a little obsessed, but I know it's just a phase. And it's just part of his experience learning about nutrition is he weighs his food and counts all the calories. He counts how many grams of protein he has. I guess counting your macros is what they call that. He's learning about his gut microbiome and probiotic foods that he also needs to eat, how much water he needs to drink. His exercise fitness program, he watches fitness gurus on YouTube, and he's almost 16 now. But then he had his anesthesiologist phase, and he was researching anesthesia. He thought he wanted to be an anesthesiologist, and he would research okay, what's the lifestyle of an anesthesiologist like? What's the work like? Started learning some of the science behind it. We learned the story of how anesthesia was discovered, and now he's definitely gone in the direction of entrepreneurship. So he's starting a business making ranch dressing right now, and he's designing the label. He's learning about food safety and how to get a commercial food license, or if he needs a commercial food license, what's required in order to sell this ranch dressing. And so this is going in depth. This is the different times and seasons of his life, I've had people actually ask me, if a child were just allowed to learn about what they were interested in, they'd be learning about dinosaurs and princesses for years. No, actually, they won't. It's a time and season of their lives, and they will exhaust themselves learning about those topics, and they'll move on to something else. Mm-hmm. My son had a dinosaur phase for a year. He was obsessed with it. He remembers some things, but he's moved on to other things. He never gets dinosaur books at the library anymore.
I think the core principles that we're trying to teach here is recognizing that the secret isn't always to do more. It's doing less with more depth. That is a misconception that the more you do, the smarter your kids will be, or the better off they'll be, or the more prepared they'll be. But really going deep into something is what's really going to give them the experience and preparation to be more well-rounded adults, because they'll know how to learn.
Think. They know how to learn. And they become their character. We talked about character development through stories, character development through experience. They become a passionate person by feeding their passions. That's how they become a passionate person. And passionate people rule the world. It's the people who get obsessed with something that they're the ones who influence. They're the ones who make change. They're the ones who make discoveries and invent things and create beautiful art and protect our environment. They make change.
So this is it's a permission slip to allow yourself, to allow your child to go deep on something, to reread the same book, to go back to the same place, to study the same thing in history or one person or one location, and just go all in and miss something else. You're always, when you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. But there's so much value that is gained from the depth that give yourself permission, your child permission to deep.
Perfect. Okay. We'll see you next time.
If this podcast was helpful for you, please leave us a review and share with a friend.
Until next time, start with stories and everything else will follow.
You can learn more about our other education projects at angelselda.com and wonderwelllearning.com.